It's Bible Club, it's Bible Club, it's Bible Club in our town. There's singing, there's laughing, let's get the word around. Folks are excited, we are all delighted. It's Bible Club, Bible Club, Bible Club, Bible Club, Bible Club in our town. It's Bible Club, it's Bible Club, it's Bible Club in our town. There's singing, there's laughing, let's get the word around. We're all excited, we are all delighted. It's Bible Club, Bible Club, Bible Club, Bible Club, Bible Club in our town. Okay, well, I need everybody to be quiet. And can you read out? Can you read loud?
Stand fast.
Listen. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty, wherewith Christ
hath made us free.
That's good, that's good. Just stop at the word free. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free. So can you see what our lessons are about for the next 4 weeks? Can you see what our lessons are about for the next 4 weeks? Law and liberty. Law and liberty. Now, the last 4 weeks we were talking about law and, you remember what it was? No, we're starting this week law and liberty. For the last 4 weeks it was law and grace. Law and grace. Does anybody know what grace is? Grace is when we get something that we don't deserve. Okay? Have you ever gotten something and it was really nice and you got it but you really didn't deserve it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much. And we talked about having a list and being good and all that kind of stuff, but pretty much any gift that we get, we don't really deserve it. And that's a gift, and it's grace. Then, before that, we talked about law and faith. We talked about law and faith. Now, I'm not going to ask you if you can remember what faith is, unless somebody knows. Nope. Okay. But, so we've had now 8 weeks of talking about the law. What does the Bible mean? Or what should we understand when we say the law? 10 Commandments. Maddie says the 10 Commandments. Can anybody think of anything else? The law? Does anybody? Who did the law come from?
God.
Came from God. Is the 10 Commandments in the law? Yes. Okay. What are some of the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not. We already said steal. Fight. Well, fighting comes from anger, and anger, if we let it go, turns into what? I wish I could kill that person, right? If we let it go, anger will take us to that. And the Bible says, the 10 Commandments says, thou shalt not kill. Right? Thou shalt not commit adultery. Right? Lucas, remember one last week? He surprised me last week. Remember which one you said last week? Thou shalt not. Starts with a C. The last one, the 10th one. Chloe, do you remember it? What did he say last week? What?
Curse.
Curse? Well, that would be our mouth. And taking the name of the Lord in vain. Covet, remember? Thou shalt not covet. So, now, I want to ask you something. I'm not going to think about any more laws. But, the law does something. And we'll come back to that thought about what the law does. If I said, let's see here, how should we do this? If I said, for the next 15 minutes, Miss Amy is going to be Lucas's slave. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a slave? What does it mean to be a slave? What do you think it means to be a slave, Jasmine? You're doing stuff for people that they don't want to do themselves. It probably is that. What else might it be? They're forcing you to do stuff. You're serving somebody else. So can a slave do what they want to do? No. They're doing what their master, their owner, or their master wants them to do. What do you think about something? What? Oh, the master is lazy, so the slave does everything. Might be. Yeah? Can you think of anything else? So, if Amy is Lucas's slave, and Lucas says, I want something, can Amy say, oh, later on? No. Can she say, that's not fair? No. What happens? Now, we don't think this way in America today, but in other countries, there are people that are slaves. What happens if Lucas says, do this, Amy? He might not even call her Amy. He might say, slave, do something for me. And she doesn't do it. She'd probably get whipped or beaten or some type of punishment. Maybe put some screws on her thumbs. Teach her to obey the next time. Awful, awful, awful bad things. It sounds awful. We don't think that way, but that's what can happen to us. Does a slave have any rights at all? No. Now God gives people slaves, and that's why no person should ever be a slave. But to another person. But it happens. And we got to think this way because the Bible tells us to stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made you free. Now, so Christ made people free. What were they before they were free? What were people before Christ made them free? They were slaves. That's right. And we're going to talk a little bit about how they were slaves and how Christ made them free. So, the Galatians, who are the Galatians? They're people, right? They're people that live in an area called Galatia. So we're all Hoosiers, right? Why are we Hoosiers? Because we live in Hoosier. No, we live in Indiana. So we're called Hoosiers, right? You know that, right? You didn't know that? Oh, come on. The IU, you don't know that you're a Hoosier? Yeah, you probably learned about that in school. We're Hoosiers because we live in Indiana. Well, the Galatians were Galatians because they lived in Galatia. And Paul went to Galatia and taught those people there. When Paul went there and preached to them and told them about Jesus, what did they do? What were they, well, many of them got saved, right? They got saved and they believed on Jesus. But before they believed on Jesus, who did they worship? They didn't know about God. So they didn't worship God.
They worshiped idols.
They worshiped idols. That's right. Now, they worshiped idols. Now, when you would go to the temple where the idol was, did the idol tell you anything?
Nope.
No. Did the idol move his hands or anything like that? No. Did the idol eat?
No.
No. Did the idol think?
No.
No. So, why? How would you know what the idol wanted you to do?
No.
Somebody else was there, right? There was probably a priest there. You would bring, when you worship the idol, you would bring food there to the idol. Who would eat that food? No, the priest would eat that food. He would say, hey, this is a pretty good job being the priest of an idol. All these people think they're serving the idol, and I get to eat. It's bad. So, but people that worship idols, they were not happy. well, they might have fun this day or that day, but they always lived in fear. They were afraid. It would rain. And you know what happens sometimes when it rains really hard? Lightning and thunder, right? They would hear lightning and thunder and think, oh, the idol is angry with us. That's the way they would think. They wouldn't do a single thing. They were always afraid that their God, their idol, was angry with them. And maybe their idol God would kill their animals, their cows, and they wouldn't be able to milk their cows anymore. Or it would send a lightning into the field and start their crops on fire. Or would make it so their child got sick. People that worship idols are in continual fear of their idol, and so they will do anything that comes to their mind that they ought to do for their idol. They are a slave to the idol god. Whatever the priest down there says, they're going to do it, because if they don't do it, they are afraid. They are fearful. And they're a slave to the idol god. Okay? You got that? Now, none of us, we don't worship idols. So we don't understand that, but that's what happened. So when Paul came and preached to them, they got saved, and they looked like this guy up here. Does he look like a slave? He doesn't look like a slave. He's happy, isn't he? He's like, all right, right? I'm free, right? I have liberty. Now, we got to stop the thought, hold on to it, and we got to think about something else. Who really made every single one of us? Who made us? God made us. And I'm going to tell you the answer to this question. That God made all of us so that we could make Him happy. God made us so that we could make Him happy. But most of the time what we do doesn't make Him happy. Because we're sinners. Something happened way back. Adam and Eve, remember them? They sinned, and so then inside every one of us is something that is a desire to do what we want to do, to be selfish and not to please God, and we are sinners. And so we actually we're more almost like a slave to sin. Have you ever seen someone who was drunk? Did they really want to be drunk? No. They didn't want to be drunk. Did they do things that they wanted to do when they were drunk? They didn't do things they wanted to do when they were drunk. Why did they do the things that they did? Because they were drunk. Why did they get drunk? Because they thought that the beer would be fun, would be something good, right? But you drink enough beer and what happens? You get drunk. Why do people keep drinking beer if they're going to end up being drunk? Because they have to, right? They're addicted to it. It's like they're a slave to it. Okay? Have you ever seen somebody that's really, really old, where they just look like they're really, really old, and they're still smoking? Okay? And what happens to people if they smoke all their life? Almost all of them, well, we're all going to die, but they die awful life. They die of awful sickness, of cancer. So why do people keep smoking? They can't stop, right? It's almost like that little cigarette says, come here, right? It doesn't do that, but it's almost like it does, because they could throw their cigarettes away, and then they go to get some gas at the gas station, and they, oh, I really want a cigarette, I smoke, right? And they go and they buy it. It's almost like the cigarette says, you will buy me and you will smoke me. They're a slave, aren't they? So, why do people, have you ever seen somebody be mean to someone else? Does that make God happy when you're mean to someone else? God created us to make Him happy, right? So does it make Him happy when we're mean to someone else? So why are we mean to someone else? Is it because we're obeying God or because we're doing what we want to do? So we're a slave to our own desires, right? We don't always go around saying, oh, I wonder how I can be nice to everybody today. Everybody's looking out for who? Themselves, right? We think we are the most important person in the world, and we are going to take care of us because we're a slave to ourselves. But God made us so that we would make Him happy, right? And it doesn't make Him happy when we do things for ourselves. So every single person in the world is a slave to sin and to himself. But when they get saved, what did the verse say? Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made you free. When you turn from your sin and believe on Jesus, Jesus Christ makes you free. He gives you liberty. And so you can be like this person here. You don't have to always think about yourself. You can wake up in the morning and remember what Jesus Christ did for you and say, I love Jesus so much, I want to be nice to somebody today. Right? We could do that. We could wake up in the morning and say, I love Jesus so much, I'm going to obey my parents. We could do that once we've trusted Jesus, because Jesus makes us free. He makes us free to be able to do what God always wanted us to do. So, the people in Galatia, they were free. They learned they were free of the idols, right? And then some people came along. Remember? Some other people came along and said, oh, that's good, but you need to follow these rituals and obey these other rules that are in the Old Testament. Well, what is the law like? We saw the big picture of the fire and the clouds on the mountain when God gave the law last week. The law is a bunch of rules, right? Let's say at Bible Club I had 126 rules. And I said, if you don't keep every single one of them, I'm going to stick your head in the snow outside.
What?
But it's my Bible Club. I got 126 rules. You have to obey every single one. First thing, you'd be afraid that you didn't know all 126 rules, right? And then you'd be afraid that you didn't keep all 126 rules. You'd be afraid that I might see you doing something that isn't really wrong, but it looks like it was wrong against one of Pastor Voegtlin's rules, right? Because it's rules. It's the law. Is the law full of freedom or full of fear? It's full of fear. Laws and rules is full of fear, right? Because I have this rule, I have 126 rules. It's like, I'm afraid, right? Now, Pastor Voegtlin doesn't have the authority to stick your head in the snow outside, does he? Okay? He doesn't. But if somebody can make a law that you have to obey, they do have the authority. And pretty soon, you are a slave to the law. The Galatian people, they were free, right? They were free, but Paul said, you started obeying these rules and all this stuff, you've fallen from your freedom, and you're a slave again. You're a slave to the law. See this slave? Now that looks, yeah, he's got a chain, like a big weight, a big ball, an iron ball, and a chain around his neck. Do you think slaves ever had chains around their neck?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did. And so Paul says, you could be free, you were free, but you're trying to obey certain rules and everything like that. Christ made you free so that you could please God. We'll talk about that later. The way you please God is by walking in the Spirit. But Christ made us free so that you could do the things that make God happy, but you're trying to obey laws and rules and all this, and you've made yourself a slave again. Listen, people don't have to obey the law to be saved. In fact, there was one man. Do you remember when Jesus died on the cross? Remember when Jesus died on the cross? If you see pictures of not pictures, but paintings, drawings of when Jesus died on the cross, you always see one in the middle, and there's one on either side. The Bible tells us that there was 3 people crucified on crosses at the same time. Jesus was one of them, and the ones on either side, they were criminals. They were thieves. I'm pretty sure the Bible even says they had killed people. Maybe it's somebody else. But anyway, they were very bad people. And they were there, they don't die as soon as they were on the cross. They were hanging there. People were making fun of them. And the one started yelling at Jesus. And the other one said, "What are you yelling at him for? He has never done anything wrong." Now, had he done anything wrong?
Yes.
The guy on the sides? Yeah, they both. He said, "We are here because we did wrong. We deserve this, but he doesn't deserve this." And then this guy over here. Now, is he a good guy? No. He would. If he was a good guy, he wouldn't be on a cross, would he? He's not a good guy. But all of a sudden, he realized that Jesus was who he said he was. And he said, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." Would Jesus be going to a kingdom? Because Jesus is the king, isn't he? He died on the cross, but he's the king. And in a kingdom, everybody obeys who? The king. That's right. So this man said to Jesus, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And you know what Jesus said to him? He said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Or basically, in his kingdom. So this bad person, did he obey any laws in order to go to paradise? In order to go to heaven? He didn't, did he? All he did is believe on Jesus. Right? He believed on Jesus. And since he believed on Jesus, Jesus said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." And of course he died later that day. And when he died, where was he? In paradise with Jesus. Now, let's say they weren't on a cross. And this guy walks up to Jesus and says, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom, because I believe on you." And Jesus would say, "When you die, you will be with me." Right? And if he believed on Jesus, what would he do? He would go off and he would do things that make Jesus happy, wouldn't he? But this guy, he didn't have a chance. But he didn't have to obey any laws in order to be in heaven, right? All he had to do is believe on Jesus. So, right as we finish, I want to tell you about the man who God used to write this book, Paul. Do you see Paul here? What's he got? He's got a chain on him, right? So, now, not everybody who has chains on their wrists is a slave. Can you tell what... Is Paul a slave here? He's not a slave. He's got chains on his wrist, but he's not a slave. What is Paul? What? What'd you say? I think you were right. He's in jail. There's a soldier there that Paul is chained to. Poor soldier, right? That soldier had to listen to Paul all the time. And what do you think Paul talked to that soldier about? About Jesus? Did Paul act like he was in terrible situation because he had chains on? No, he had chains on, but was he free? He had liberty. Did Paul have to do the things that sin wanted him to do? Even though he had chains on? No. Did Paul could live for God even though he had chains on him, didn't he? Paul saw lots of people come around him while he was a prisoner, and those people heard about Jesus. Who did they hear about Jesus from? Paul. And then they believed on Jesus, and then they went, there's like lists of 5 or 6 people just in the Bible, and we know there's way more than that the Bible doesn't tell us about, that they got saved because they were around Paul while Paul had chains on. So can you do something good for God? Can you please God even if you're a prisoner? Yeah, even if you have chains on, maybe even you're a slave. Hopefully none of us are slaves. But in our history, in America's history, we did have a time when we had slaves. And some of those slaves were Christians, and they were very good people. Their body had to go work for somebody, but their spirit was free, and they could obey God and make God happy by what they did. So the Bible teaches us in Galatians that we are free from the law. We don't have to live in fear of breaking laws once we have believed on Jesus. If Jesus Christ has made you free, He's given you liberty. We're free from our sin. Before we were saved, we're free from pagan ideas about idols and gods and demons and all that. Those things, some of those things are real, but we don't have to serve those things once we turn to Jesus Christ. and we don't have to serve the law. Now, Jesus made us free. Before we were saved, every once in a while we do something good, and then we just do something bad again. If we wanted to do something good, we would do it for a day or two, and then we'd not do it anymore. But when we're saved, Jesus Christ gives us the liberty, the power to be able to do good. And He does that through the Holy Spirit. We're going to learn about that some more next week. So this week we have learned about having liberty from sin and liberty from the law. And that liberty is so that we can do good. Right? And why should we want to do good? To make God happy. And God gives us the power to make God happy, the ability to make God happy. Jesus did that, right? Jesus is the one that, if Jesus didn't die on the cross, and Jesus didn't save us, would we be able to make God happy? We would never be able to. We would be like that person that gets drunk every week. In the middle of the week, he thinks, oh, I wish I wouldn't get drunk. At the end of the week, he gets some money, he stops and gets some beer, and pretty soon, he's doing what he didn't want to do again, isn't he? But with Jesus, Jesus frees you from sin. And so because He's freed us from sin, we should be so happy, and we should love Jesus so much that we want to do good things that He gives us the ability to be able to do.